All right. Hello, everyone. Good morning from Boulder, Colorado, here, as well as the DC area and I believe San Antonio, Texas. I bring to you learning Google Cloud for AWS and Azure professionals. So, we're going to expand your knowledge on your multi cloud. So, not just get you familiar with what you got, but let's bring you into Google Cloud as well. With me are Manjeet Dadyala, who is our partner enablement technical lead, and Mark Johnson, who is a solutions architect with who works at multi-cloud. So today, as you know, I've just introduced you. We're going to talk about why you should care about multi-cloud, and we're going to talk about an overview of multi-cloud content we have here at Google Cloud, as well as what a skill badge is, why you should get it, as well as a little bit of Q&A. But that's the agenda. We are going to actually have conversations and not have me read slides because this is all about panels, not about me. So I am the Learning Portfolio Manager here at Google Cloud for infrastructure, networking, DevOps, and multi-cloud. And with me is Manjeet Dadyala and Mark Johnson, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
Yeah, thanks, Anne. Hello, everyone. Yes, I'm Manjeet Dadyala. I'm the Partner Technical Enablement Lead for Google Cloud. So my work entails training up and enabling our partners on Google Cloud, whether that's certification or a number of our different enablement activities. So happy to participate and be with you for the next hour. Thanks.
Thanks, Anne and Manjeet. My name is Mark Johnson, solution architect, work with a lot of partners with Google, and I also do a lot of training, so excited to be here.
Glad to have you both here. Thanks, guys. So let's talk about something that's all on everybody's minds today. Why should I care about multi-cloud? Why is this a thing, right? So 85% of organizations today use at least two, maybe more, of infrastructure as a service provider, and attesting that the age of multi-cloud is really here, right? You know, we're talking about what you've experienced. Manjeet and Mark, I'd love to hear you speak to this and see what you run into on your day to day.
Sure, absolutely. So, more and more what we're seeing is, as Anne mentioned, and as this data point indicates, more and more organizations are using multiple clouds, right? There's a number of reasons for that. But what does that mean for you as an individual, as a practitioner, right? So there's opportunities to expand your knowledge. Perhaps one or multiple. And so as an individual, that potentially can open up a lot more doors, a lot more opportunities, expertise, so on and so forth. So you also start to understand what's consistent across clouds as well as what are some of the differences and differentiators.
Mark, what about you?
Yeah, great point. For me, when I think about multi-cloud, the most I really think about a lot of clients that I work with day in and day out. And no matter how few or how many people are a part of those organizations, they all have several clouds they're using. So it's very valuable today to be able to know about more than one cloud. So you just add more value to yourself and your skill set into that company.
Fantastic. One of the other things you run into is one of the things Manjeet alluded to earlier was just previously about a few seconds ago was greater than 50% of decision makers out there are either hiring staff or retraining existing staff to optimize their cloud spend. So when you already have cloud knowledge on a different cloud, for example, before I came into Google Cloud, I had some experience with AWS and another very small cloud vendor called SkyTab. It helped me to have that common knowledge and that base before moving on and understanding Google Cloud. And that's where you're going to run into where you don't have to retrain nearly as much and you can retrain faster because of the commonalities that you run into to various clouds. What do you guys think? Mark, go ahead. I'll start with you this time.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I totally agree. I think, when any organization is looking at, growing their staff and they're basically trying to, get the most out of, their existing skill set, those who have multi-cloud experience, also going to have a leg up. Mm-hmm. And then also being retrained is going to be, that path forward is a lot shorter than if you would just start from scratch, just knowing that one cloud.
Yeah, and let me add to that as well. So, clearly what this means is that your knowledge of an existing cloud can lend benefits to learning the next cloud, right? And so what I like to describe here is that understanding cloud is really fundamentally predicated on 4 key pillars: compute, storage, networking, and security. And so based off of that, having that understanding will allow you or allow organizations to learn the next cloud more efficiently. And so what it then becomes is an effort of incremental learning as opposed to net new learning. Now, it's not going to be that everything is 100% the same across those clouds, but compute, storage, networking, and security, right? Those are foundational, right? They're not going to be drastically different. It's really about understanding the nuances and how those different clouds are operating and doing things differently. And so, if you've got existing knowledge of one cloud provider, right, you could train and learn that much more efficiently because it becomes a marginal effort.
Exactly. Another example is identity management, right? They all have different ways of doing identity access management, but at the same time, it's still the fundamentals of management of people's identity and how they do it. Additionally, in addition to all the things we were talking about, AI ML is the top reason that a lot of people embrace multi-cloud, right? Generative AI, you can't have a meeting or have a conversation with anybody in the cloud world these days without talking about that. And that's particularly important, especially since workloads are carrying over into MLAI, and ML ops is also an important factor in dealing with multi-cloud. What are your thoughts, Manjeet? I'm going to actually lead with you and have you continue and then go on to Mark.
Sure. I mean, we're seeing a lot of interest across, folks that are working in the AI and ML space or are interested in working in the AI ML space. Clearly, we believe Google Cloud brings several key differentiators to market in this particular space. But in order to understand our value proposition, I think it's very important to understand how Google Cloud is working at its core to support these key features with AI and ML. Right. And so the way I like to describe it is, you've got platforms sitting on top of platforms. Right. And so we've got GCP. We've got Vertex AI, for example, that sits on top of GCP. We've got now our new generative AI, which is essentially sitting on top, let's just say, of Vertex AI in one example. Right. And so understanding that multi-layered implementation and strategy for AI and ML is going to enable those organizations and those practitioners to be successful with what we're bringing to market.
Absolutely. Mark, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, great point there. And for me, what I'm seeing a lot of too is why a lot of organizations are really, especially nowadays, going way more into the multi-cloud is because when you're looking at AI and ML, there's so much innovation. There's so many new products being announced across every provider. Folks want to be, they want to be agile, right? They want to be able to try new things from this company and this cloud provider. So I think it's very important, just being aware and having this skill set so that okay, I can pick and choose which products and services I need to use.
Absolutely. And that's one of the nice things about cloud, right? Because you can do that. You can pick what services you're using and not and specialize that way. So with that, let's start with what multi-cloud content we have here at Google Cloud. So that way we've got our folks who come in from AWS and Azure understanding what we're doing as far as how to get into Google Cloud and feel like they already have that common knowledge that Manjeet and Mark were talking about earlier. So in here, we talk about the infrastructure modernization. So we'll talk about that because that, as the learning portfolio manager in infrastructure, this is where my thing is. And this is where a lot of the content is, where we have for multi-cloud right now. So we have a lot of stuff that applies to cloud admins, cloud engineers, cloud architects, cloud engineers, and even DevOps to some extent. So the courses we have focus on the things that Manjeet mentioned that are core, right? identity management, identity access management, and networking, compute and scalability, storage and containers, and deploying and monitoring, because that's just as important to understand how cloud ops is used when we're monitoring things in multiple cloud environments, when you're going from one cloud to another. And also we're comparing and contrasting the differences and commonalities between the AWS services and the Azure services and Google Cloud. So we know what those differences are and the importance of them. So skip to the next slide. So you can see we've got the same thing here for Azure as we do for AWS. So we talk to the main cloud people who come in with those main cloud knowledges and can share them and build on them. After you've taken the courses, you can actually get what's called a skill badge, which is a type of credential. And I'm going to talk to Manjeet and Mark about this a little bit. So what is a skill badge? A couple of people have asked me about this, like I could get a certification, right? But the way we've got things going with Google Cloud, multi-cloud training, you can actually earn after you've taken those courses, and you could take a series of self-paced labs and take a challenge lab and get a skill badge, which is a nice little credential that you can have on your either social media or your resume, and show that you understand cloud, more than one cloud more than one cloud technology. Manjeet, please go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So as Anne indicated, this skill badge is a digital credential. And so you earn that by completing what we refer to as a challenge lab. So we've got different types of labs on our Cloud Skills Boost platform, which is our learning platform, which contains courses, labs, as well as what we refer to as a quest. So a quest is comprised of a number of labs, and it essentially ends with what we call the challenge lab. And so the challenge lab, relative to what those other labs are, which are essentially learning labs, a challenge lab actually presents you with a scenario that you actually have to solve. And so you are not guided to the solution. You actually have to implement within Google Cloud the solution to that scenario. And if you pass that, and there's a scoring mechanism that actually validates if you're doing things as expected. And if you pass the challenge lab, you earn the associated skill badge. And by earning that skill badge, it's a digital credential, as Anne mentioned, that gets added to your Skills Boost profile. You can add it to your resume, you can add it to your social media like LinkedIn, so on and so forth. And it just becomes, another validation for you personally, for your organization that you're with, and potentially with, perhaps you're working with customers that you can convey that, I do bring this knowledge and capability to the table.
And Mark, for what you see in your experience as a solutions architect, how do you find skill badges help out?
Yeah, really valuable in my side of the fence, because really, working with new technologies all the time, there's so many products coming out, and being able to get that hands-on experience is really key. And that's where these skill badges come in, because as Manjeet mentioned, of course, there's these learning quests you have to go through, but those challenge labs, they could be tricky for sure, because sometimes there's a few different ways you can, accomplish something, but you really got to pay attention and really have to know your stuff to be able to complete them. So all in on those skill badges, and challenge labs are great.
They're a great way to show your technical acumen without having to study for a certification if you need something faster. So that's one of the things I like about them as well. There's an overwhelming value to Google Cloud skill badges. We talked about it. You can prove you have hands-on experience. You can show, hey, look, my skills are in cloud are growing. They're not, staying stagnant. They're growing. And you can keep building your cloud competencies. So we have a couple of skill badges for multi-cloud, one for the folks who come in from primarily AWS knowledge, and another who come in from Azure. So we can definitely help anybody out who wants to come in with their knowledge and not have to start from the ground up, right? You get to bypass things like core infrastructure fundamentals, because we make that assumption that you know that content. So we're going to have you come in at more of an architecting level and understand it and get the skill badges. And that sets you up a little better to take things like professional cloud architect exam.
Yeah. Let me highlight one more thing
Sure.
there. So as you notice here at the very bottom, it says skill badge intermediate.
Yes.
So that's the level or the difficulty that we've classified these skill badges. And so we've got a wide range of levels of skill badges outside of just these. So, there could be introductory, intermediate, advanced. And so as you start learning these technologies that we're putting out for Google Cloud, right, there are a number of quests and hence skill badges that you can earn across a number of areas. So infrastructure, security, networking, data, AI, ML, we've got a wide range. And so you can start adding these to your portfolio, right, of what you've earned and use those, one, to demonstrate your knowledge and capability, and then two, if you want to share those out with others as well.
Absolutely. They're great, right? Because you can prove, hey, look, I've done this. You don't have to sit there and study for a certification immediately. You can later on, but at least that way you've got something a little bit faster, and it still provides that knowledge that you know. So what I'd like to do, if it's okay with you guys, I know the slides didn't take that long, but I'd love to get onto the questions because we have a bunch to even start with. So we'll start with the first one, and it is for both of you. Let's talk about your multi-cloud journeys. Mark, let's start with you for this one. I'd love to hear with your multi-cloud journey.
Awesome. Yeah. So for me, my journey started probably maybe 8-10 years ago. And it really kind of started more so working in an environment, heavy Microsoft. And then we moved over to Google Cloud. And really what helped me in that, in that journey was the fact that, okay, we were already using a lot of Microsoft products, and then moving into Google, it helped close that gap, as Manjeet mentioned earlier. Like, if you're coming in and you already know some of these core, infrastructure things or just in the environment, it really helped me, upskill into Google a lot faster. So that's really my background. It started with Microsoft. Then from there, of course, a lot of clients, they use AWS as well. And a lot of them use all three. So it really helps when I, work with different clients, and I frequently jump in between them.
Fantastic. Manjeet?
Sure. Similar to Mark, mine started about 10, 11 years ago. My first foray was actually with AWS, working on projects. And I then subsequently, at an organization I was at, was building a partnership with AWS. So that required me to upskill, obviously, and then build a team that could actually upskill as well. And we earned a special service delivery designation from AWS. So that was my initial foray. And then I started to delve into Google Cloud because I wanted to understand what Google was bringing to market. And I was also in parallel building with that organization a partnership with Google Cloud. And so what happened was I actually started to become intrigued by the Google Cloud value proposition. I started to hone in on the differentiators, which to me, was simply getting access to the technology that Google had to build to service Google's growth, right? And this is now being exposed to the rest of the world as Google Cloud. And so I was actually really kind of taken aback, and I was just like in awe, and I was kind of wowed by that. And I decided to go even deeper with Google Cloud, earn multiple certifications, and I kind of did like this I kind of bet my future on Google Cloud because I really wanted to specialize in Google Cloud. Having said that, however, I stay up to date on other cloud platforms, including AWS and Azure, as it's a key component to my role at Google Cloud as the partner technical enablement lead. So that's the high level overview of my journey.
That's fantastic. It's great to hear. Mine actually started out with AWS, and prior to that, SkyTap, for a learning environment, for a learning lab environment. So being a lab architect and learning how to maintain a lab environment. AWS coming from an environment where you're doing things like VMware, it was great, right? Because you can actually move stuff around in the cloud, and you could create images, AMIs, and then move them around, and then go, okay, cool. I can reproduce instances faster of that image. And then you learn that every cloud has that same type of ability to have kind of a master and reproduce it. And learning that in an example of an enablement role, I think for me was also very helpful because you learn it's a very fast way of reproducing things. So for me, it's been great. And then I started at Google Cloud a little bit under 2 years ago, and I'm really enjoying the journey here because of the amount of services here, learning things like GKE and how that drives everything is just it's an amazing way to see things on a scalable level here. And that's the other thing that Google Cloud does extremely well. And I've spent a lot of time with the networking teams as well. And our networking services that we offer are just amazing. And I've worked with some great teams. So we've already discussed what the benefits of multi-cloud are. So I think I'm going to skip that if that's okay with you guys. But one thing I do want to focus on, because we did mention this earlier, but I think it's kind of cool to hear a real life example of going from one cloud technology from another, right? Because Manjeet talked about that coming from AWS to Google Cloud. But what I want to find out from both of you, and I know that Mark goes from customer to customer site, dealing from cloud to cloud. What are the commonalities you run into with most clouds that make it easy to come from one cloud to another?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the first things that stand out is, and you all mentioned a little bit earlier, was the IAM stuff, right? So when you're talking about identity access management and, how everybody has some kind of directory that they're using and users, and you need to onboard folks, just the different tools and methods that you can get these folks into Google is definitely one of the most helpful things you can learn, because no matter what, you're going to be dealing with something that's already existing and figuring out how to get those integrations to work with, with the direction you want to go. So I think that's really, that was one of the main things that was helpful for me. Just really understanding how all those syncing methods work and best practices there.
That's great. Manjeet, how about you?
Yeah, I'll go back to my comment about those 4 pillars, right? And so, really at the end of the day, what are we trying to do, right? We're trying to solve outcomes for organizations that are using the cloud, right? And so outside of the technology, right, understanding what those outcomes are is very critical, right? And, at some level, the technology should not matter, right? But the moment you're multi-cloud, or meaning you're multi-cloud knowledgeable, you can impart, I think, better recommendations to those organizations to solve those challenges, right? So, we believe at Google Cloud, those differentiators that I mentioned will enable those organizations to achieve those outcomes more efficiently, securely, at a better, value proposition, potentially even, from a cost perspective. Things along the lines of like, a company starting small, eventually growing global, right? The way our networks are designed, our virtual private clouds offer some significant benefits to grow into that global organization without having to kind of retool certain things from a networking perspective. So there's a lot of things that, I found helpful coming from one cloud to another, but have always been focused on solving those business challenges or those organization challenges and driving those outcomes, because that's really what we're trying to do at the end of the day.
Ultimately, yes, right? We want to solve business problems. So that brings me to my next question, Manjeet. I'm going to have you continue on that thought. And this is, how is Anthos critical to Google Cloud's multi-cloud strategy?
Sure. So first off, like, what is Anthos, right? I guess that's the critical question, right? Anthos is Google Cloud's hybrid and multi-cloud offering. It's essentially a cloud-centric container platform to run modern applications anywhere consistently at scale. So containerization is something very core to what we do at Google, right? We run Google through containerization, essentially, right? And so Anthos is comprised of a range of technologies, including Kubernetes, Istio, Knative, and tools for management, deployment, and monitoring. And so what Anthos can do is actually help support multi-cloud needs essentially from day one, from the time you decide to implement it and deploy it. And so rather than relying on your application or cloud infrastructure teams essentially to build tools that need to operate across those various platforms, Anthos actually provides those capabilities out of the box. Okay, and so Anthos provides the core capabilities, for example, for deploying and operating infrastructure and services across Google Cloud as well as other cloud platforms. And so what does that mean, right? And so it goes back to that solving customer needs, right? And this provides customers or organizations a consistent container platform, right? They can deploy that Google Cloud. They can deploy it, let's say, in AWS. They can deploy it in Azure, okay? So it's about that consistent environment, consistent scale, consistent skill sets, right? To actually use and like, I don't have to train somebody to do it on Google Cloud a certain way, or in Azure a certain way, or in AWS, right? So from a skilling and from a capabilities perspective, it becomes that much more efficient for organizations. So that would be my high level response on how Anthos is critical to our multi-cloud strategy.
Sure. Mark, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and adding on to what Manjeet said, I think for me, when I see, with dealing with a lot of customers, is really when you're looking at Anthos, and the reason why it's so critical is because with those services that Google has in that tool, Anthos, there's a lot of services that are managed that, let's say, if you weren't using Anthos, they'd be more open source. It'd be a lot more manual effort, for your team to deal with. So I think that's that's why it's so critical, because these tools are being used anyway. So when you're using them with an Anthos, they're managed, you get more support, SLAs, all that good stuff.
Cool. Yeah, it seems like it's the way to do things with GKE, which gives you all that functionality of GKE that you're going to want to add anyway, right? And it's going to make things run a little bit smoother. So next question was one that we got where someone was asking, let's see, where to start. There's so many areas and paths of focus and cloud, right? Because not only do you have all the different clouds, but you have things like the infrastructure parts that Manjeet mentioned: compute, storage, networking, security. You have MLAI, you have the data engineering side, you have the application modernization side if you want to go serverless and work on that. And so we get this question, where do you want to start? There's so many areas and paths, it's hard to know where to begin. Well, if you're coming in from a multi-cloud area, I really think that we're coming in, I think it's going to be big, is coming in through either AWS or the Azure, because you're going to have that base knowledge. But if we're talking about somebody saying where to start, I want to be multi-cloud, and they really don't have an idea, I'd love to hear what you guys think. What would you think would be more of a good place to start? Mark, I'm going to start with you with this one, then go to Manjeet.
No, that's a great question. I think, I think about myself in just working in a lot of different environments and organizations. And I think, the way I started was really what I was doing previously. Let's say, maybe I was working on a server team of some sort, or maybe it was infrastructure. From that perspective, I would look at stuff like the core infrastructure, skill badges or learning quests, things of that nature. So you can pretty much take what you're already learning and then just see how it works within Google. And that can kind of help you ramp up, so you can get things aligned, so that when you starting to look at other clouds or other services more advanced, you already have that good foundation set.
Then that brings you to be able to take things like the PCA and ramp up forward a lot faster, correct?
You got it. Exactly.
Manjeet?
Yeah, so for specific, for what we're talking about today, we've shown those optimized learning paths, right? For AWS or Azure backgrounds. And what that starts to do is, as Anne was describing, it gives you the comparables, right? The mappings with what you already know to what we bring to the table from Google Cloud. And so, you can start there, right? So those are curated learning paths. Those are very efficient learning paths, is what I would say. It's a series of 4 courses and the skill badge that that Anne highlighted, but we offer a number of other avenues for you to learn, right? And so the Skills Boost platform provides courses, on-demand courses, which contain videos and quizzes and so on and so forth to help you get exposure to Google Cloud, our services. They also provide hands-on labs in those courses to support learning, as well as we've got a number of different labs. I mentioned various difficulty levels. So we've got labs starting, from quick starts, which are the easiest labs that you can perform. They kind of give you a high-level overview of what that particular service or capability is, all the way down to some very advanced labs, which require you to really think about things, for example. And then we have those validation labs that I mentioned, which allow you to earn a skill badge. And we have this across the board, right, for various tracks. Infrastructure, security, networking, data, AI and ML, DevOps, developer. So, whatever you're interested in, whether that's, you want to try something new or align to your particular job role or function, we've got curated, mapped out learning paths, as well as, an entire portfolio of additional content that you can consume and get your hands dirty with Google Cloud to build your knowledge and expertise.
Yeah, for example, if you take one of our classes for infrastructure for cloud infrastructure for AWS or for Azure users, there are 4 classes of 4 to 6 hours each. It's not going to take that long to get up to speed coming from a previous cloud knowledge to know what you're doing. If you're coming in from the ground up, it's going to take a little bit longer, but if you're going to be coming in with previous knowledge, it's not going to take you that long. We've got those courses are 4 to 6 hours each, 4 courses each, depending on which way you go. And then the skill badges generally take a few hours. So it's not really a significant amount of time that we've run into with that. So that's one of the things that was, they came up for questions, but it aligns with this one. The other question I have that was kind of interesting was, and this is for both of you, since you've both lived in this, are there differences in using infrastructure as code tools like Terraform with different cloud providers? So in Google Cloud, we actually offer training we have a skill badge, we have a quest, which is a series of self-paced labs, as well as a course on Terraform and using it in Google Cloud. But I don't have the knowledge to know how they work in other clouds. And I was wondering if you guys could kind of let me know, I know a lot of the world has embraced Terraform. Terraform's used as a way of building repeatable infrastructure, right? It's a great tool. A lot of people use it. A lot of people like it. We use it here at Google Cloud. So I want to get a feel for where you've run into it in other clouds and how, or if there's other tools you use rather than Terraform for it. So Manjeet, I'll start with you on this one.
Sure. So, we support at Google Cloud, infrastructure as code tools, including Terraform. And if you're currently knowledgeable with Terraform, right, those skills can be easily transferred and used on Google Cloud, right? So you don't have to learn anything net new, right? It's a popular choice for those deploying and building in the cloud, whether that's Google Cloud or the other cloud platforms. We also offer our native tool called Deployment Manager. So, you have an opportunity also to see what we're doing with Deployment Manager, but many customers and many practitioners are very comfortable using Terraform on Google Cloud. And so really it just boils down to, understanding what you need to do in order to get our infrastructure stood up and working through Terraform.
Yeah, totally agree. Well said. And that one of the things that I've seen as far as Terraform when it comes to Google Cloud, a lot of times is really just changing the provider name. So for those of you who are really into it and really like dealing with your IDEs and coding out, Terraform scripts, it's really that simple. Of course, there's other things that you have to ramp up on, but there's a pretty much common, framework format that you have to set up when using Terraform, and the Google Cloud falls right into that. So I don't see as any, big gap or barrier to transferring those skills over.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. I mean, it's one of those things where people are like, I've come from this world, or I've come from on-prem. How do I do what I'm comfortable with and understand those things? So next one of the things I'd like to do is get questions from the audience. So let's see, do we have any questions from the audience? I'd love to know. All right. So Venkata asks if there's any OCI skill badges out there. No, I believe that's the Oracle Cloud, correct? At this current time, we don't have any Oracle skill badges out there, but it's good to know that we're getting some questions about it and wanting to know if there's any demand for it. So thank you for your question. Are skill badges considered an intermediate step towards a certification, towards a professional certification? They can be, or they can be used as a way to do anything after certification as well. For example, Manjeet has certifications, Mark has certifications. If there's a new technology that came out or something else they want to get a knowledge on and prove they have the knowledge on it, they can do that after a professional certification. So Manjeet, can you provide an example? Mark as well?
Sure. So I would say, as Anne mentioned, you can use them pre and post. So if you take a look at some of our learning paths for certification on Cloud Skills Boost, let's take the professional cloud architect learning path as an example, right? So it's going to comprise of a number of on-demand courses, for example, as well as some recommended quests where you can earn those skill badges that actually support your knowledge and skill build. And what I like to convey about those skill badges is think of them as kind of intermediate quizzes that you can use to self-validate what it is that you know and what you're able to do. And so I highly recommend at least those quests and associated skill badges that are mapped out on our various certification learning paths as validations and kind of checkpoints for yourself to determine if you're really understanding what we're hoping that you can start to kind of upskill on. And so what we found, and if we look at some of our data, and I believe one of those slides that Anne showed, those that are earning those skill badges, right, we find that they are more successful in their preparation for certification. So think of that as kind of a way to help you, one, validate what it is that you know, as well as build your confidence before you actually decide to take the exam. And then after you get certified, for example, let's say as a professional cloud architect, right, we still have a number of other skill badges that you can earn within the infrastructure modernization domain, for example, to continue to build your knowledge and capabilities. And that would be the case across essentially all of our roles that we certify on, like architect, data engineer, developer, DevOps engineer, security engineer, network engineer, and so on.
No, I totally agree. Well said. And really, the way I think about the skill badges as well is I think they're hand in hand, to be honest, because you really get that hands-on knowledge and experience versus, from a certification, yes, you have to answer the questions, but this is really going to help, to Manjeet's point, your confidence in actually performing the work, so when you're going into these command lines, or if you're actually having to go through the actual console and do something, you're going to actually, know how you did it. And so I think, honestly, the skill badge for me, a lot of times is more valuable initially because I'm actually doing it, so once I'm able to do it, then it's like, okay, I believe I can answer these questions.
The other thing you can use a skill badge for example, like Manjeet is talking about, all right, you've got really strong infrastructure skills, but you want to have a better understanding of like the MLAI world. Mm-hmm. Start building skill badges in that direction. So you could use them as intermediate steps towards that professional certification and say PDE or ML, or you can use them and say, hey, I've got infrastructure, but I also have these additional skills. So it's kind of a choose your own adventure rather than a requirement to use them as intermediate steps. But I do agree with Manjeet and Mark, having the hands-on experience with the skill badges makes all the difference in the world. Okay, next question, please. What's the difficulty level of the certification exams compared to, for example, Azure? I have not taken any Azure exams, so I can't speak to those. So Manjeet or Mark, if either of you can speak to that, please feel free.
Sure. So the way I'll respond is that we've got different tiers of certification. Okay. So we've got associate level certification. So at least the technical certs, an associate level certification, which comprises just of the associate cloud engineer certification. And then, if memory serves me right, it's 9 professional certs. Maybe I'm off by one on that count. And those vary, for example, from cloud architect, security engineer, network engineer, so on and so forth. And those are at a different level relative to the associate cloud engineer. But don't let the classifications of associate or professional necessarily convey to you the level of effort in order to actually sit for and pass those exams. We do recommend certain recommended experience with Google Cloud before you actually take those exams. So for example, the associate cloud engineer exam, we recommend at least 6 months of working with Google Cloud. And then for most professional certifications, we recommend at least 1 year of experience of working with Google Cloud and or several years of working in industry, because our exams are not necessarily just going to test you on Google Cloud. They're going to test you on things that you may have seen or you should likely have seen out in the field. And so that's why, as Mark and Anne were indicating, those skill badges are very supportive of closing the gap if you don't necessarily have those marks or those bars of recommended experience. But to kind of get back to the source of this question, the difficulty level, I think, would be kind of like on a case-by-case basis. I've seen scenarios where people have thought that the associate cloud engineer certification was more difficult than, let's say, the professional cloud architect certification. So, and I've seen vice versa, right? And so it really depends. But what I would say is we highly recommend working with Google Cloud, getting the hands-on experience before you attempt to take one of our certification exams.
I would agree with that. Mm-hmm. Oh, sorry, Mark, go ahead.
No, I totally agree. Yeah. And to your point, I haven't personally sat for an Azure exam, but I've done, of course, AWS and, other providers. And I would say, like, as Manjeet said, it really does just depend on your background and experience overall, just to how difficult they'll be. And I do agree. I've heard the same thing about the associate cloud being harder than some of the professional level certs. So I would just say, check out some of the sample exams on the website, and you can kind of get an idea of like what that difficulty is like. And then that should help you in your journey.
Absolutely. And that is absolutely key. I took ACE and passed it last year after 6 months experience in Google Cloud, which is about on par for what people are expecting. And I studied for it significantly. I put a lot of work into it, and I'm studying for PCA now. And it's a very different animal and a very different perspective, because where ACE felt like it was very much in depth, even though it's an associate, it actually is very technical. PCA is not necessarily the depth. It's still technical, but you have to know quite a bit more about all of Google Cloud's products and not just strictly mainly the architect or not the infrastructure side of it. So if that helps. We're on to our last question next from the audience. Do we provide free access to Google Cloud for learning purposes? If you've registered for cloud, I think it's cloudskillboost.google, that will get you into being able to use Google Cloud for be able to use that. I believe we've got like a free 30-day, and with that you have self-paced labs and you have skill badges and the courses, and you can take those. I believe the first 30 days, please correct me if I'm wrong, are free. So you can actually, it provides you with the lab environment, so you don't have to set up an account. I believe if you do set up an account, I'm not sure you get like X number of usage comped on you if you're doing it with the business. There's all sorts of things that I'm not as familiar with that I wouldn't be able to speak to, since that's not necessarily what we're here to chat about today. But you will have the ability with Google Cloud Skill Boost to get in there and play hands-on, and it won't cost you extra other than the subscription to Google Cloud Skill Boost. So
yeah, and there is one other option. If you're coming through an organization that's a Google Cloud partner, we do offer no-cost training for Google Cloud partner learners. So we've got a separate instance of Cloud Skills Boost specifically for partners. And so, if those of you who are here are interested in learning about Google Cloud or learning Google Cloud, and you are at a Google Cloud partner, there are some ways that you can get access as well.
Well said. Totally agree.
Cool. I think that's it for questions from the audience. I want to thank everybody for coming. It's really appreciated. Please go ahead and check out our training. If you do decide to check out our training, please go ahead and fill out the feedback from the training, because we do incorporate that and we do make sure we make improvements over time. Also, for this event, please provide us some event feedback. We'd like to know how we're doing and where we can keep doing things right and where we can improve on things. So thank you, Manjeet. Thank you, Mark. I appreciate your time.
All right,
Appreciate it. Thank you all. Take care.